Gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Got an important lesson that I wanted to share with you today, and I appreciate you being here watching this video. This is Unboxable Kings, and the goal of this channel is to empower you to live a life free and on your own terms. So before we dive into the content, if you want to work with me, please check the link in the description, because I've wrote you a letter. Hopefully the grammar is better in the letter over there, but go check that out if that message resonates with you. So today's lesson is related to the environment that we spend our time in, and to help me share this lesson, I want to share with you a story. So behind me here, very relevant staging and backdrop for this video, is my daily driver, 2005 Subaru Outback, paid cash, owe nothing on it. Another lesson on that. Would I do that again? Check out that video, because I think it's relatively important and relatively interesting to hear about that. But it needed a coolant change, and I'm in a season of my life where I'm doing most of the work on the car myself because of location, intention and enjoyment. So I knew I needed a coolant change, so I went to the auto parts store, to get the coolant. And I walked in, and I'm looking around the aisles, and a few young kids said, "I really like your hat, man." I just went, "Thank you," which always makes me laugh. "And you probably like my hat too, c'est la vie." And I couldn't find the coolant, so walked to the desk, and I was like, hey man, can you show me where the coolant is? And he was like, "Course." And he, is kind of a bigger guy, waddles over, and he goes, "Oh, it's right here." And I'm like, "Oh, great, thank you very much." And he was like, "What car do you have?" And I said, "A Subaru." And he goes, "What year?" And I said, 2005. And he went, "Oh, you're probably going to want this one or this one." And the one he pointed to first is this one, Xerox by Valvoline, Asian vehicle antifreeze. And he was like, "That's the one that you probably want, but that one's expensive." He said that one's double the price of the universal coolant. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I kind of defaulted back into old decision making, old programming, and he had a pretty compelling story. And I was like, "Well, will that one work well in my car?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, it's universal, it works in every car." And I was like, "All right, well, in this exact scenario, this guy is technically in the authority position. He works at the store, he's supposed to know more about cars. Technically that's not necessarily true, but in that split moment, that's the character I defaulted to, and that's the hierarchy I adopted, right?" So I take the two universal coolants, I go to the till, I check out, and as I walk out the doors, I open these double doors, and it's a surreal feeling if you've ever had this. It's like almost like changing a computer program. And I opened the double doors, and I was like, "Oh, hang on a minute, have I made a good decision there?" And I went and sat in the car, pulled out my phone, did a quick couple of Googles, which I probably should have done before, but I didn't really anticipate having to make that decision there. And it said that, like, yes, you can use a universal coolant in Subarus, but this engine specifically prefers a different chemical that isn't found in universal coolants. They use a different technology, and the engine would take it, but it could potentially lead to downstream effects where you overheat, blow a rod, all sorts of problems that people have reported using universal coolant. So that side lesson is that when you're doing maintenance and looking after tools, investing in the premium option is nearly always the best solution, because of the small discrepancy in price up front makes a huge difference in the downstream costs, but that's a lesson for a different day. So I went back in the store, picked up two of these, and instead of paying $20, I paid $40, so it was double the cost, right? And I went back to the checkout. It was a different guy. He billed me up, and I walked out, came back home, filled the coolant, it's working fine, engine's running way better. The lesson I wanted to share with you, because I think it's a very important one, and I know it's very pivotal in deciding whether you are going to live free and on your own terms. And the lesson is, which men are you listening to in your life? Because even though this is just a snapshot, it can be extrapolated into a whole bigger lesson, where in that moment I was listening to a dude, no disrespect to him, he is just living his life. He's obviously a guy that's price conscious, focused on cheap, He wants it to be done cheap. And you could argue, actually, that he's just promoting his universal coolant, maybe. But the way I interpreted it was he was just all about cost, right? He just wanted it to be cheap, cheap, cheap. And in that moment, I listened to him, and it nearly led to potentially a destructive event in the future where, I don't know, the wife's driving the car and the engine blows up because the coolant isn't exactly what the engine wants, and then she gets in trouble. It could have led to that, right? And that all started from listening to the wrong dudes. And you could take this for absolutely every single piece of your life. And what I wanted to share with you, because I see this all the time, I've seen it in my life, I've seen it in clients' lives, I've seen it in friends' lives, I've seen it in guys that have mentors' lives, is that often the biggest obstacle to your growth and you actually living a life that you want, making changes that you want, being the man that you want, is that your environment is surrounded and filled with dudes and men specifically that are just not empowering you, and they're not making you feel like the man that you want to be, and they're not pointing you in the right direction. They're giving you these pieces of advice that isn't ultimately serving you. And it's until you've trained yourself, and obviously in this story it took me 90 seconds or so to recalibrate back to the man that I want to be, until you've actually developed the skill of that and developed your own philosophies and programs. When you're kind of vulnerable in that stage of growth, which if you're watching this video and this channel and the stories resonate, it's likely that you're there. You know, you live in one life but you want a different life, and you're in this in-between phase, is that it's much easier to be persuaded and opt into other people's stories and other men's ideas and philosophies when you're in that space. And especially when you declare, like, I'm going to change, and you set the intention to change and become a different man, those voices are often going to get louder. So it's really important that you decide to put yourself in the right environments and listen to the right people, because if that had been, imagine if I'd have walked in there and the guy would have said, he could have said something completely different. He could have said, well, look, this one's double the price, but Subaru engine, the universal coolant may work, but what could happen is the engine's going to actually interact incorrectly with the chemicals that's in this one. And if you choose the Xerox, yes, it's double the cost now, but it's almost certainly going to give you no downstream problems. So I would personally take the $40 option. If he'd have said that, right, how would I have reacted? I'd have been persuaded. And again, extrapolate that out to your whole life. Money, women, finances, health, fitness, is that the advice that you're listening to, the people that you're listening to, who you're surrounded by, is going to shape a lot of your actions until you become the sovereign decision maker, which is the end goal, that you make the decision on everything that empowers you. And I believe I'm trending more towards that every single day. And in most aspects of my life, I am already there. That took time for me. So depending on where you're at in your journey, just check in and have a think about who you're listening to. Have a think about who you're spending time with, because if you do read the letter that I've proposed and sent to you via the link in the description, you'll realise that pretty much, and this is only ever increasing as I do this work, 80 to 85% of the insight and the 80 to 85% of the value exchange of investing in a coach, a mentor, a guide, whatever you want to call that role, is that you get to put yourself in an environment that is 100% tailored to your growth. Because you actually have all of the answers within. You don't really need outside advice. And I know I make this channel and maybe sometimes it sounds like I'm giving you advice, and maybe sometimes I am, maybe that is the 10%, but honestly, most of the answers are already within you about how you want your life to be. You already know the answers. You already know which decisions to make, but if you're in the wrong environment, it can be more difficult to make those decisions. So by putting yourself into the right environment, and that's what we provide, that's what I provide through Zoom, through the groups, all of that, is that you get to put yourself in the environment where decision making's easy, where empowering decisions are obvious and normal and regular, and you can't really underestimate the impact of that and what it has on your life, because otherwise you'll end up listening to waddlers who want cheap, 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 and you can't do this, you can't do that, that ain't gonna work, that's risky, or maybe that's not for you, all that bullshit. You'll just be listening to that your whole life, and it's just, I don't really encourage that. So that's kind of what I live my life doing, is taking these small interactions like buying Xerox Asian vehicle blue antifreeze and extrapolating them into bigger ideas. That's what we do on this channel. If that resonates, subscribe, stick around, read the letter below, join the various links, and it helps you live a more free, empowered life, because I know now that I don't have to worry about downstream impacts, and it's another reminder to make sure I'm listening to the right people and downloading the right information, because in this information age where it's unlimited, you have to be the discerning sovereign man that decides what actually goes into your subconscious imagination, Christ consciousness, because if you don't, you're going to keep building and sprouting things that you don't want. And if anybody is into cars, this did have green coolant in before, but allegedly around 2014 most of the coolant manufacturers switched from green to blue, so now it's blue. It's like changing out the superhero colour, and it's running great. Alright, thank you very much for watching. Appreciate you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I assume you will have the best day ever. We're going to have the best day ever. And live free, live on your own terms, and live as the king you were meant to be. And I'll see you next time. Much love. Peace.